We are living through a solar revolution. Across the country, over 140,000 homes, including the ones behind me here, have been fitted with solar panels. We think of solar as a clean and responsible way of getting our energy, but there is also a dark side to our solar revolution. At least 70% of Ireland's panels come from China, the world's undisputed leader in solar technology. And for this, it was lauded at the COP30 climate change conference in Brazil last month.
China embraced this agenda in an extraordinary way, because if the solar panel costs 90% less than a few years ago, much more people in the developing world can afford them.
But there's a catch. The essential ingredient in your solar panel is something called polysilicon. And in China, this is produced by burning vast quantities of the dirtiest fossil fuel of all, coal.
当钢铁学会跳舞，便是这个时代献给大地最震撼的史诗。
In China, polysilicon is made in ultra-hot coal-powered furnaces burning at thousands of degrees, where raw silicon is purified to a level where it can be used in solar panels. China has built vast industrial parks to accelerate this process, with coal mines, silicon furnaces, and solar factories sitting side by side. The heartland of China's polysilicon industry is the Xinjiang Development Park, a barren and blasted industrial zone that stretches across hundreds of kilometres of the province of Xinjiang, in northwestern China. Xinjiang is home to China's largest integrated coal field, with reserves of at least 250 billion tonnes, about 1,000 times what the EU burns in a year. The open pit mines are up to 5 kilometres wide, and on satellite imagery, they look like deep scars on the desert landscape. Satellite imagery and corporate reports show that at least 3 of the world's top 10 polysilicon manufacturers are supplied by Xinjiang's coal mines. Because of the way it has supercharged this process, China has come to dominate the market, producing over 90% of the world's polysilicon in 2023. So what kind of impact does the production of this clean, green energy have on the local environment? We asked Andrew Parnell, a professor of data science, climate and weather at UCD, and his colleague Chantel Amoako-Atta to investigate.
Well, we looked at satellite data because that's all we had available. We don't have ground-based measurements on these sites at all. So we looked at satellite data where we looked at NO2 and SO2 and carbon monoxide as well. And these don't tell us what the people are actually breathing on the surface, because it's a column that the satellite sees, but it's as close as we can get. And what we found is places like Urumqi have very high levels of pollution. They're certainly not the only places with very high levels of pollution. And also in other countries, in India and even in parts of the US, have very high levels of pollution. But I was really surprised when you look up the maps of the satellite information and you see these bright red sort of hotspots in these tiny little places that you've never heard of before. And when you start to drill down, you can see that this is exactly what's happening. You've got these very high temperatures that are required for the manufacture of polysilicon, and the pollution that goes with them seems to really spike in these kind of cities.
An individual solar panel, if used, will become carbon neutral within 4 years and can provide about 25 years of pollution-free generation. But China's supercharged process has led to a huge oversupply of as yet unused panels, and Xinjiang has borne the brunt of the environmental cost. The Chinese embassy told RTÉ Investigates that all activities in Xinjiang strictly adhere to environmental protection regulations and industrial policies, continuously driving green and low-carbon development. Behind this environmental devastation lies an even darker secret of the ethnic minorities forced into work by the state to power China's solar boom. Because in Xinjiang, China has built a system of state repression targeting the region's ethnic minorities, particularly the Uyghurs, that some critics have called a genocide.
The Uyghurs constitute a relatively small minority of 11 million people. They're Turkic Muslims. They live in the relatively sparsely populated northwestern section of China known as Xinjiang. And beginning in 2017, the Chinese government detained 1 million of those 11 million people, essentially to force them to abandon their culture, their religion, and their language. No one else has tried anything like this. And they have decimated Uyghur society.
China has long denied all allegations of forced labour and human rights abuses in the province. So, how is this relevant to Ireland? Because Chinese manufacturers that provide many of the panels to Ireland source much of their polysilicon from factories that use forced labour with coal from mines that do too. And nowhere is this more apparent than in Xinjiang Development Park. RTÉ Investigates focused on the polysilicon supply of two major Chinese companies that supply solar panels to Ireland, Jinko Solar and JA Solar. Delving into Chinese social media accounts, corporate records, company reports, government records and state media reports. And what we found raises serious concerns, ethical and environmental, because their supply chains go right back to Xinjiang and to Xinjiang. In 2022, a company called RTÉ Energy signed a deal to supply 336,000 tonnes of polysilicon to Jinko Solar through to December 2030. And JA Solar has signed similar deals with RTÉ, one of which runs to December 2026. RTÉ Energy is based on the southern outskirts of Xinjiang Development Park, and it gets its coal directly from Xinjiang's mines, where researchers have documented the use of forced labour under the guise of so-called poverty alleviation and labour transfer schemes.
Labor transfers relocate Uyghurs from their homes in rural areas to urban areas to work in factories. Teams of government officials go door to door to identify candidates for transfers.
They don't have a choice to say no. There's no consent, there's no informed consent available. Because if you say no to a program like this, the Chinese government has explicit directives that indicate that that the police can lawfully detain a person who chooses not to go on a poverty alleviation program or a labor transfer program.
And research by RTÉ Investigates found that in recent years and right up to the present day, thousands of workers deemed surplus rural labour by China's authorities have been transferred to work in Xinjiang.
We now know that the labor transfer schemes are the main modality and method by which the government is putting people into forced labor. So we're not seeing so much the detention, internment, re-education camps that we all read about a few years ago. It's much more people being moved from workplace to workplace, whether that's within the region or outside the region.
Jinko Solar was also a direct beneficiary of these schemes at its own Xinjiang factory, according to research by Sheffield Hallam University, taking in dozens of ethnic minority workers at this facility. It sold this factory in 2024, but continues to purchase from it. Its annual report details around €200 million worth of procurement from the facility right up to the beginning of this year. And as for JA Solar, the Biden administration sanctioned its subsidiary, Donghai JA Solar, in January 2025 for sourcing its polysilicon from Xinjiang. JA and Jinko are consistently ranked as the two largest solar panel manufacturers in the world, and their panels can be found all over Ireland. They may even be on the roof of your home. We wrote to both JA and Jinko to ask them about these findings. JA Solar said it has a zero-tolerance policy toward any form of forced or involuntary labour or human rights violations. It said its customers had full transparency into our operations and supply chain for the information necessary to support their due diligence processes. It said Donghai JA Solar ceased all production in 2018, but RTÉ Investigates found footage on Chinese social media of workers on a Donghai site as recently as September 2025. And its 2022 annual report detailed millions of euro worth of procurement by the company. Jinko Solar said it has zero tolerance for forced labour in any form, and that its operations adhere to all applicable local laws and international ethical standards. It said all Jinko modules can satisfy the client's requirement regarding traceable, independently audited supply chains.
A real pleasure to visit Shannon Airport here today and two very significant investments, about 3.6 million euro into a new solar farm, which is generating 20% of the energy, clean, green, renewable energy.
A couple of weeks ago, a new solar farm at Shannon Airport was opened by the Transport and Energy Minister Darragh O'Brien. It uses JA solar panels. And so does, for example, Wicklow County Council. And the ESB confirmed to RTÉ Investigates that JA solar panels have been used in ESB solar projects. Even our biggest solar projects, projects that power homes right across the country, rely on Chinese panels. RTÉ Investigates identified multiple sites, including state-owned solar farms, where panels from JA and Jinko were used. Developers said they followed rigorous procurement processes and had policies in place to ensure the modules they used did not contain polysilicon linked to forced labour. So the state and our national grid are linked to the sourcing of solar panels from companies long alleged to be profiting from forced labour in Xinjiang. Can the government plead ignorance of these issues?
The use of Uyghur forced labor in the solar industry should be well known. There has been reporting on this since about 2020. So really, we engage with solar companies as well, and they often argue that, it's difficult to find alternative sourcing for polysilicon, which is the main component that is exposed to Uyghur forced labor and is found in most solar panels. We would argue back that you've had many years to find alternative sourcing, and we cannot have a transition to clean energy which is based on state-imposed forced labor, which may amount to crimes against humanity.
Wicklow County Council said the contractor that installed its panels made a self-declaration that it would not employ labour in a manner that is discriminatory. Shannon Airport said the Shannon Airport Group complies with all EU public procurement and policy directives. We are reviewing our procurement processes and are committed to strengthening checks across the extended supply chain. And the Department of Climate, Energy and the Environment said that projects are conceived, financed, built and operated by developers, communities or SMEs. Individual procurement decisions to construct solar projects, including all components for supply and operation of the plants, are taken by those entities.
No solar panel should come from China unless there's a guarantee that the polysilicon was freely made, which you can't get. And this, we're used to thinking about the Chinese government providing subsidies to manufacturers, unfair subsidies that allow them to compete with European manufacturers unfairly. Uyghur forced labor is in effect a subsidy. It's a serious human rights violation, but it's also a way of allowing a factory to produce cheaply, because somebody with forced labor cannot insist on a decent wage.
But what are the alternatives? China's position of dominance is almost absolute, something that was reflected in comments that then Taoiseach Micheál Martin made to the Seanad in 2024, when asked about the human rights situation in Xinjiang.
We all need to get a bit real. 80% of pharmaceuticals consumed in America are made in China. Climate change will not happen without China's manufacturing capacity, i.e. The wind industry across the world. We cannot gear up in terms of the wind infrastructure that would be required, or indeed solar panels, given the manufacturing capacity in China. So we can cut ourselves off, if that's what some want us to do. That's very easy to do, but that has consequences too.
Other countries, however, see things differently. For example, this year, the UK and Italy implemented restrictions on state procurement of solar panels linked to forced labour in China, showing another way is possible.
It's one thing to say, Ireland's a small country, it can't alone decide what to do. But the European Union can decide what to do, and China cannot afford to retaliate against the entire European Union because, China is a much bigger exporter than it is an importer. And it doesn't want to get into a tariff or a trade battle with Europe because China will lose.
For now, new sites are continuing to open across the country. Most of these will be powered by Chinese solar panels, further cementing China's dominance of the industry and Ireland's reliance on its manufacturing capacity. And that puts Ireland in a challenging position, because the pressure is on for the state to meet its climate targets, and it is lagging way behind. There have been warnings of potentially staggering fines of up to €26 billion if it fails. So, is it the right time for Ireland to shine a light on the Chinese solar industry? Or, as our current Taoiseach suggested, do we need to get real and leave these issues in the dark?